What did he say during the Saturday speech, and really what was kind of the main purpose of what they wanted to get out of this visit?
Right. Dombrovskis was in Shanghai this weekend. He gave a speech at the annual Bund Summit on Saturday. And actually, he didn't say much about the China trade relationship during the speech. He said, as you mentioned, the China trade, China's trade with EU is very imbalanced, but EU is not seeking to disengage with China, decouple from China. So based on what we're hearing from people familiar in Europe, he's here, to tell Beijing maybe concrete measures are needed to reset the relationship between the two trade partners. So the reality is, the two China and EU are, the tension has risen following recent EU's launch of anti-subsidy investigation of Chinese EV sales in China, in Europe, and the trade, imbalance, is a huge problem. As if you remember, the trade deficit between EU and China, more than doubled to $277 billion over the last 3 years, to 2022. Trade deficit has narrowed a bit, but still running at record high around, that level.
Charlie, even if we don't necessarily see a breakthrough during these negotiations, could we at least be headed towards a high-level summit? What's next for the relationship?
Yeah, the talks, by Dombrovskis is holding with Beijing officials this week, is happening under something called EU-China Economic Work Dialogue, and this is viewed as a stepping stone for a summit between President Xi Jinping and the EU President later this year. We don't know what exactly that the EU official is going to tell Beijing leaders this week. He's expected to meet a very senior, standing committee member today or tomorrow. The fact is, the two countries, EU and China, are suffering a setback in terms of the trade, as EU, is getting increasingly skeptical of China's practices in terms of, for example, its relationship with Russia, but Beijing maintained that the trade imbalance was caused by EU's restrictions of exports to China, for example, the Dutch company AMSL is restricting a sale of chip making equipment to China, and so Beijing thinks it's EU's fault.
Our Shanghai bureau chief.
And what's more important? And what's more important is, the background information. In 2021, EU and China suspended the European Investment Act, which is a major setback to trade between China and EU, and the reason for that was EU's regarded China's behavior in Xinjiang was a concern for them.